Hello and good morning to everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this Dharma Friends of Israel course, the continuation of our teaching on Mahamudra with our dear teacher Glen. My name is Tomer. I will be the host of this event. Before we start, I'd like to mention that, as always, this meeting is being streamed live on YouTube. You can find in YouTube the Dharma Friends of Israel channel by pressing DFI Israel on YouTube, or you can press on the YouTube icon in the Dharma Friends website. Of course, you can find there the first part of the teachings, along with many previous recordings of other events and courses of Dharma Friends of Israel. You can see, as is written in the slide here, we request that you please switch off your webcam and microphone. It will help us be much more concentrated on the teaching. The text for this course can be found on the event page on the internet, on the Dharma Friends of Israel website. So you simply go to the page where you pressed on the Zoom link. At the bottom of the page, you have the text. I will also send it via chat. And finally, as you probably know, all the activities of the Dharma Friends of Israel are done by volunteers and financed only by donation. So if you like to support the continuation of our activities, you can practice generosity and donate for a teacher. You can do so with the PayPal or bank transfer. And you can find the details for that at the event page at the middle of the page. You have the details, and I will also send them shortly via chat. I think that is all. I want to wish all of us a very interesting and insightful teachings. And again, thank you, Glen. You can take it over. The stage is yours.
Thanks, Tomer. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone back here to this Mahamudra retreat that we're running over 2 weekends. So this is the second weekend of the 2 weekends. In the first weekend, we covered the preliminary practices, a little bit of Tantra Mahamudra, and within Sutra Mahamudra, the Shamatha practice. And this weekend, we'll be moving into the Vipassana practice in Sutra Mahamudra, the Vipassana practice of emptiness, and also looking at post-meditation and how to integrate into daily life. The schedule will be the same as last weekend. That'll be 3 sessions each day, starting at 8:30, finishing at 1:30, 30-minute break in between. The structure of each session, again, the same. We'll start with a guided meditation, presentation of materials, another guided meditation, and at the end, a Q&A, question answer. If you want to ask questions, then you can put them in the chat, and then Tomo will read them out, and they can be in English or in Hebrew, and he'll translate the Hebrew questions. Recommended reading, the Gelug Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra from His Holiness Dalai Lama is his book that's a commentary on the text that we're following, and also a book from the Kagyu Mahamudra tradition, Crystal Clear, by Trungpa Rinpoche, a very good book as well on Mahamudra practice. The materials, again, it's the same materials, the same text that we've been using in the last weekend. Text from Panchen Losang Chiki Geltsen. Lots of charts attached to there. We've looked at some of the charts there in terms of the Shamatha practice. There's a few more charts here in context of Vipassana practice that we'll be looking at in the coming days as well. So let's start the first session today. And in the first session, we'll do a review of the main points that we covered last weekend. So we sort of have clear in our mind the context of where we are in the text, so that when we move forward, we won't sort of get lost of where we are. In this session, we'll start with a meditation. The first meditation will be just to settle body, speech, and mind. In other words, to relax the body and mind and set a good motivation for the weekend's program. Then we'll again look at the overview of the text that we're following. And then we'll go through the main topics that we've covered last weekend. That is the preliminary practices, an overview of Tantra Mahamudra, introduction into Sutra Mahamudra, and then looking at the shamatha practice within Sutra Mahamudra. And then we'll finish with another guided meditation. The main shamatha practice in Mahamudra is observing thoughts, observing the mind. And then time for question and answer at the end of the session. So let's start with a short meditation just to really relax body and mind and setting a good motivation for the weekend. Finding a nice comfortable posture, let's begin. Allowing your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. And bringing your awareness to the area of your face and softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. Mouth and jaw, soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed. And in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. And allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing the mind to come to rest. To come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. And here in the context of Mahamudra, the Panchen Lama advises us to start with a virtuous, pure mind by going for refuge and generating bodhicitta. And so that they're not merely words from our mouth, we'll precede them with a short reflection on the four thoughts. This precious life of leisure and opportunity is rare and easily lost. The world and those within it are impermanent. I too will die soon. The results of my virtuous and non-virtuous actions will without fail ripen within me. And there is no genuine happiness to be found within the abodes of samsara. And so I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And by my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then keeping this motivation in mind, we can slowly end the meditation and begin our discussions together here today. Let's review the main points from last weekend. The text that we're following for this retreat is called The Main Path of the Victors, a root text for the precious Gelug Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra by Panchen Losang Jegi Gyaltsen. And here the word victor in Sanskrit is Jina. It's another name for a Buddha. So a Buddha is someone who's gained victory over the two obscurations, the afflictive and the cognitive obscurations. And what they are will be coming to see a little bit later in this Vipassana part of the text that we're about to begin. The root text is the text we find in bold, and then the other text that sort of pads it out is coming from Panchen Losang Jegi Gyaltsen's own commentary to his root text. Mahamudra here, or in English translated as Great Seal, is talking about emptiness, but not just emptiness, emptiness of the mind. Because we're coming to realize the emptiness of the mind, the ultimate nature of the mind, we can achieve the great goal of enlightenment. And here we're following the Gelug Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra. We saw there that the Mahamudra system of practice is the main system of practice in the Kagyu school, whereas in the Gelug school, the main system of practice is Lam Rim. However, Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelug school, also received teachings from Kagyu masters. And then he synthesized his own profound understanding of emptiness together with those instructions. And we have this lineage of Mahamudra here, which was then passed down master to disciple to Panchen Losang Jegi Gyaltsen, who then wrote it down. And in the text, the main outlines were entering into the composition, then within the actual explanation, the preliminary practices. Within actual practice, we had a brief look at the Tantra level of Mahamudra. We're currently looking at the Sutra level of Mahamudra. We've completed the Shamatha part of that. We're about to begin the Vipassana part of Sutra Mahamudra. And then the conclusion, which we'll be looking at on the Sunday, also includes the post-meditation, what to do outside of meditation practice to continue to practice this Mahamudra, and then finishing with dedication of virtue. And so in the entering into the composition, we saw there initially that the Panchen Lama is paying homage to Mahamudra itself. In other words, paying homage to the realization of nature of mind. He's also paying homage to his guru who introduced him to the nature of his mind. And also, as part of the entering into the composition, he makes a promise to compose the text, to complete the text. And he says, I shall now write down these instructions, meaning previously they were just oral instructions passed down master to disciple. Now he decides to write them down so they don't get lost. And then the first main part of the actual explanation was the preliminary practices. And here we saw it started by saying that in order to have a doorway for entering into the Dharma and a central pillar for the Mahayana, sincerely go for refuge and generate bodhicitta. And so here we saw that the door of entry into the Dharma was going for refuge. That if we go for refuge into the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, that really marks the entry point into the Buddhist teachings, that we have faith and confidence in the Buddha, his teachings, and the spiritual community who follows those teachings, that they can really help us to overcome suffering. And then the door of entry into the actual path to nirvana, exemplified by Theravada Buddhist traditions, is this aspiration of renunciation. Whereas here, Mahamudra is within the context of the Mahayana, where the goal is enlightenment. So we enter into the Mahayana vehicle by cultivating this bodhicitta, the aspiration for enlightenment for the welfare of others. So therefore, the door of entry here into the Mahayana and the central pillar of the Mahayana is bodhicitta. So that is the motivation for doing Mahamudra practice. And then we saw also that we can talk about Tantra level of practice, or Vajrayana. And to enter into that vehicle, we need to get this empowerment from the qualified guru. But we saw there that we are to, Panchen Lama was advising us to sincerely go for refuge, generate bodhicitta, without them merely being words from our mouth, meaning that we need to have a good foundation to be able to really enter into that path through refuge and bodhicitta. And so here then we had the common preliminaries. These are the preliminaries for the sutra level of Mahamudra practice. And they were to reflect on precious human life, to have then an aspiration to make our life meaningful, to see that we've got this precious opportunity. But then to follow that with a reflection on death and impermanence, to understand that this precious opportunity we've got, that we tend to take for granted, is not going to last forever. In fact, it may disappear very quickly. And therefore, to aspire to make our life meaningful right now, not to somehow keep putting it off. But then how to make our life meaningful, the third reflection is to reflect on the causality of our actions, understanding that harmful actions leads to suffering, beneficial actions lead to happiness, and therefore, at a foundation level, to adopt an ethical lifestyle to make our life meaningful. But even if we adopt an ethical lifestyle, then we still encounter suffering. And so then the fourth reflection is to reflect on the view of genuine happiness, to really reflect on the fact that the source of suffering, the source of happiness, is not anywhere out there in the world. It comes from within our own mind. And then we can really these four thoughts can really turn our mind inwards and help us to develop a wish to be liberated from suffering. But then if we understand that we're not the only ones in this situation, everyone else is, then we can also, on top of that wish to be liberated from suffering, which is renunciation, we can go on to cultivate this bodhicitta, the aspiration for enlightenment for the benefit of others, and thereby enter into the Mahayana path. But we also saw there that there were what's called the uncommon preliminaries for the Tantra level of Mahamudra practice. And they include also refuge and bodhicitta, because Tantra is based on sutra. And so therefore, this is also a Mahayana practice. So we have to go for refuge, generate bodhicitta to have a door of entry and a support for Tantra. But then to also purify our mind and accumulate the merit and wisdom through the two practices of Vajrasattva and Mandala offering. And then really to practice sincerely this Guru Yoga, to really have a strong connection with a guru, so that we can really take advantage of their instructions and receive inspiration and guidance in this path, because at the level of Tantra practice, we really need that to make effective use of our time. And so really to receive those blessings by having a guru near us to inspire us and guide us in the path. But also to remember that the text says not to just think of these as preliminaries that mean that there's something we do at the beginning and then we tick them off and leave them behind, but rather to practice them by integrating them into our actual practice. That these preliminaries are not only important at the beginning, they're important at the middle and important at the end. So to continue to practice these preliminary practices so that we can continue to have an effective foundation for the more advanced Mahamudra level of practices. And then we began by looking at, after preliminaries, the Tantra level of Mahamudra practice. So in terms of the order of practice, we would begin with Sutra level and then Tantra level. But because here in this text, the main emphasis is on the Sutra level of practice, therefore the Panchen Lama just briefly mentions Tantra Mahamudra at the beginning, so we have an idea about what it is, what comes later in the practice. And so we saw here that Tantra Mahamudra is all about gaining access to this clear light mind, this very subtle level of mind that's sometimes also called primordial consciousness, pristine awareness, and Rikpa. That we can talk about three levels of mind. The mind we have now is the coarse level of mind. And then in Sutra level of practice, we're refining that coarse mind through the shamatha practice, gaining access to the subtle level of mind, what's sometimes called the substrate consciousness. And then we use that in our vipassana practice of emptiness to come to realize the ultimate nature of the mind and move along the path to enlightenment. But in Tantra Mahamudra, we're going one step further. We're gaining access to the deepest level of our mind called the clear light mind. And then we use that to realize emptiness and move along the path to enlightenment. How do we gain access to that? The text here said that we do that by causing the winds to dissolve in the central channel, enter, abide, and dissolve in the central channel through skillful methods such as penetrating the vital points of the subtle Vajra body. And so to manifest this clear light mind, then this penetrating vital points of subtle Vajra body is we're manipulating subtle energies in what's called the completion stage of Tantra Mahamudra. And if we can cause all the subtle wind energies to dissolve into the heart chakra and the heart chakra opens, we can cause the very subtle clear light mind to manifest. But to be able to proceed, we have to proceed that completion stage with the generation stage practice in Tantra Mahamudra, because that prepares us for completion stage. And then also we saw that another way to do that is through these pointing out instructions, short, pithy instructions that the guru would give to us for helping us to gain access to this clear light mind. And this is called Essence Mahamudra. And so therefore, we saw that there were three levels of Mahamudra practice. Sutra Mahamudra, the two core practices there, Shamatha Vipassana, which is the main topics for this weekend's retreat. And then having established a good basis in Shamatha, in Sutra Mahamudra, we can then start to practice Tantra Mahamudra, the generation stage and completion stage practice. And then once we have some basis in this, then we can go to the Essence Mahamudra and receive these pointing out and non-meditation instructions. But the temptation is to bypass Sutra and Tantra and go straight to Essence Mahamudra, because it sounds very tempting that we can just sit there. The master says a few little pithy instructions, points out the nature of our mind, and boom, we realize nature of a mind, and then very quickly become enlightened. So it sounds very attractive, and so some people are very strongly drawn to that and probably don't go anywhere, because here we saw in that book from Daniel P. Brown, Pointing Out the Great Way, he says, ordinary practitioners generally do not understand the pointing out instructions because their minds are too clouded by coarse level thoughts, mistaken ideas, negative emotions, and dualistic perception of the external world. Therefore, ordinary practitioners must refine their minds through standard practices before the essence view can be introduced. So standard practices not only includes generation completion stage, but to precede that with shamatha and vipassana, but also to precede that, to have a foundation for that, the preliminary practices. So to do this in a step-by-step way. Then if we have some basis at these various levels, then when we receive pointing out instructions, they may actually have some effect and we can really benefit from those instructions. And so that's why we're first establishing a good basis in Sutra Mahamudra. And so we saw here in the text that Sutra Mahamudra refers to ways of meditating on emptiness as directly indicated in the three mothers. In other words, in the perfection of wisdom teachings that the Buddha gave. And so therefore, emptiness here in Sanskrit is shunyata, and emptiness is the realization that everything is empty of inherent existence. In other words, nothing exists from its own side. And this is, again, what was taught by the Buddha in the perfection of wisdom teachings. And then Nagarjuna in the 2nd century wrote his classic text, Mula Madhyamika Karnika, which then really formed the basis of the Madhyamika philosophical system that really is describing this emptiness. And here Nagarjuna is saying that there's no path to liberation other than this, meaning that we must realize this emptiness if we want to be liberated from suffering, to achieve nirvana and to achieve enlightenment. And then in terms of the sutra level of Mahamudra practice, there's two ways to approach it, that we can either first start with shamatha and then practice vipassana, or vice versa. But here we're following the method of exemplified in Shantideva's text of first engaging in shamatha practice, on that basis then engaging in vipassana practice. And so that's what we're doing in this text here. First shamatha, then vipassana. And so in shamatha, that was divided up into two parts, the preparation, the actual practice, and vipassana, as we're going to shortly see in the next session, also has two presentations, general presentation and then the actual presentation of emptiness. So in Sutra Mahamudra, in the preparation there, we saw that the preparation encompasses two things, what's called the 6 prerequisites, which is all about establishing a suitable basis for shamatha practice, and then the 6 preparatory practices, which is what we are to do at the beginning of each meditation session. And so in those 6 prerequisites, we can talk about the outer and inner prerequisites. So the outer prerequisites is to set up, have a supportive environment, to particularly a nice quiet place, but particularly having some good friends around us who can help support us in our practice. But then very much important to the inner prerequisites, to have few desires and being content with respect to all the material things, that not to be still putting a lot of time and energy chasing after all of that, trying to get more and more stuff, and then to simplify our life, to have few activities in our life. And then really as a foundation for this and any meaningful life, ethical discipline. Ethics is the foundation. And then also to really let go of compulsive thinking, because if we have a lot of desires and craving for things, we're never content. We have a lot of things busy our life, a lot of compulsive thinking, and we're not ethical, then there's no way we're going to have any sort of basis for engaging in shamatha practice. In fact, we're probably going to be very lazy when it comes to doing this practice. And if we try to do the practice, our mind will be constantly distracted, full of obsessive compulsive thinking, we'll be too busy to meditate, and it just won't work. And so here we saw that Tsongkhapa in his Lam Rim text says the most important ones here are good ethical discipline. So ethics is the foundation, seeing desires as disadvantageous, and dwelling in an appropriate area. So not only having a supportive physical environment, particularly supportive friends, but to see desires as disadvantageous. Again, to really understand the source of happiness is not coming from out there. It comes from within our own mind. Hence, the importance of those common preliminary practices, particularly the 4th one, view of genuine happiness, but all 4 will turn the mind inwards. And if we can really establish that solid foundation in the common preliminaries, then you'll find these 5 inner preliminaries, prerequisites here, will be much easier to implement. Without those common preliminaries, having established the foundation, I think you're going to find establishing these inner prerequisites extremely difficult, extremely difficult. But then also the six preparatory practices, what to do at the beginning of each meditation session. And here in the actual text, it really talked about part of that in terms of preparing body, speech, and mind, setting up a good posture. And then to this 9-round breathing exercise to help us to let go of any negative, agitated states of mind, and then preparing the mind through going for refuge and generating bodhicitta. But then the 6 preparatory practices was much more than just preparing body, speech, and mind. We saw there that first we clean the place where we meditate, have a nice, comfortable, clean place, because if it's cluttered and messy, it's going to have a negative, disturbing effect on the mind. And then really to make some offerings on an altar in front of ourselves to start to practice generosity, the first of the 6 perfections, to really get the mind in a very open and a positive state of mind. Then we can sit down, prepare body, speech, and mind, generate bodhicitta and so forth. And then in addition to that, we saw to then visualize merit field. If we want to keep that simple, we start by just visualizing the guru or teacher. And then we go through this 7-limb prayer, which is really helping us to, at the sutra level, to purify the mind and accumulate the merit and wisdom. And then really, as a sort of sutra level guru yoga, is really just to request blessings from our teacher, to receive inspiration and guidance from our teacher. And at the end of those requesting the blessings, we sought to dissolve the guru into ourself. And thereby, if we go through these 6 preparatory practices, setting up body, speech, and mind, and doing this 7-limb prayer, requesting blessings, then that will put the mind in the optimal situation, body and mind in an optimal situation, positive, uplifted, inspired, to really engage in the actual meditative practice, which here is the shamatha practice. And then in terms of the actual shamatha practice, we saw here that we are to cultivate 2 qualities, stability and clarity. But there we added a 3rd quality that we don't see in this text and we don't see often in the historical shamatha texts, and that is the quality of relaxation. And that is very important for us in the modern world, because we tend to have a very sort of a striving attitude in the modern world. We tend to push hard to get results. And then we come into practice with this sort of striving, pushing attitude. And then we get very tight and we push hard in meditation because we feel like we need to do that to get some results. But then we get more and more agitated and frustrated, and then the whole thing is a big mess. So therefore, if we really want to progress in this or any practice, we first need to establish the basis in relaxation, really to sink those deep roots of relaxation, and that will help support then stability and clarity. So to emphasize these 3 qualities in this order. And I can't overemphasize this point enough about establishing a basis in relaxation from my own experience and talking to many, many people. So really that's where we start. Relaxed body, relaxed mind. The more relaxed we are, the easier it will be to cultivate these 2 qualities of stability and clarity in shamatha practice. The easier it will be to practice any sort of meditation. Now here in shamatha, what to focus on? We saw here in the text that we can focus on any one of many different objects that are taught in shamatha. But here, because Mahamudra is really all about nature of mind, therefore we're focusing on the mind itself as the object for shamatha practice. And here it says the text that we are to attentively focus mindfulness on the mind's nature of awareness and clarity. This is just simply the conventional nature of the mind. The mind is clear and known. So we're just simply observing the mind itself. Observe it single-pointedly and nakedly. Just observe it directly. Later in Vipassana practice, we're investigating this mind to come to realize the ultimate nature of the mind, emptiness. But that's in Vipassana. Here in shamatha, we're just simply observing the mind and directly as the object of shamatha. And we do that using these 2 tools of mindfulness and introspection. And here we saw that analogy that the mindfulness is like the rope. We're tying our mind with a rope of mindfulness to the object, But then we need quality control to monitor that. That's introspection, like hooking the mind back when we notice our mind has become dull or distracted. And so here, Panchen Lama says, in brief, accomplishing faultless concentration does not go beyond the manner of sustaining mindfulness and introspection. We just sustain mindfulness and introspection, and slowly overcoming these faults and imbalances, we can move slowly, we can move along those stages to achieve shamatha. And then of the two tools, mindfulness is principal. And if that's present, introspection comes naturally. So if we simply strengthen our mindfulness, cultivate mindfulness, our ability to monitor that introspection automatically improves as well. But then how to observe the mind? We saw in the text here, there are two methods. First one is whatever thoughts arise, simply recognize each one. That is, simply observing the thoughts that are arising in the mind, observing them arise and pass. Or the other option here is to cut them off. What that means is not to block them and try and get rid of them, but simply pay no attention to thoughts. And so what we're doing there is we're turning awareness in upon itself and just simply resting in awareness itself and not paying attention to any of the thoughts, any appearances to the mind. So that is what's called resting in awareness. These were the two shamatha practices that we practiced last weekend. And in both of those, we need to balance the attention. And here, the analogy of a guitar string. If guitar string's too tight, too loose, it doesn't play well. Likewise, if our mind is too tight or too loose, it doesn't focus well. So if our mind is too tight, we're getting agitated, distracted, relax. If it's too loose and you're falling into dullness, tighten it a bit. And so that's where we do. We find that balance between those two, and that's where we find this factor of stillness. The mind starts to become quiet. But when it starts quiet, to be careful not to sink into dullness, because there's a danger that if the mind is quiet, there's nothing to really observe, we can just sink into dullness. But we saw from Master Chandra Goman, great Indian master, that finding this balance is extremely difficult. And it only comes through practice, that we need to just practice. And we'll be able to better and better fine-tune our attention and move along those higher stages towards shamatha. And then how do we sustain the practice? And so here we saw that we're not trying to block thoughts. We're simply observing them as they arise and pass. Like the analogy of the bird that's released from a ship that's looking for land. The bird flies up, doesn't see any land, and settles back on the ship. Likewise, that's how to observe thoughts. A thought arises in our mind. We don't need to do anything with it. It can't go anywhere, like the bird can't go anywhere. It will simply dissipate back into the mind. And so, therefore, some very good advice here from another great Tibetan master, Yang Gompa. Do not view discursive thoughts as faults. So thoughts are not problems. We're not trying to get rid of them. And don't try to make the mind still. Simply settle the mind in its natural state, balanced, not dull, not agitated. Step back, keep a distant watch, and then the meditation will arrive at shamatha, because these thoughts will slowly settle down, dissipate. The mind, through improved mindfulness and introspection, fine-tuning, then we'll eventually arrive at shamatha. That's all we need to do. Sounds simple, but maybe not so easy. But if we apply these tools and these practices and these advice, then we can move along these 9 stages to shamatha. And so that brings us to the meditation now. And so we will go back to that shamatha practice of the first variation, observing thoughts. And so here in the text again, it said, now attentively focus mindfulness on the mind's nature of awareness and clarity, and observe it single-pointedly and nakedly. That is, simply observe the mind. And it says, when observing this way, whatever thoughts arise, simply recognize each one. Just observe them, not following them, not trying to get rid of them, just observe them. And remember here, thoughts are all mental events. So it's not just thinking, but it's also emotions, memories, mental images. Now, in this, in Mahamudra practice in general, in shamatha and vipassana, very much recommended to have the eyes open. And that's what we did last week in the shamatha practice. Remember we can either have them partially open or just naturally open. And the reasons for that, a number of reasons. One is that by having the eyes open, it helps avoid falling into laxity or dullness because some light is coming in. But also with the eyes open, it helps to lock us more into the present moment. With eyes closed, it's much easier to drift off into the past and the future. With the eyes open, even though we're not really looking at anything, the visual gaze is still somewhat engaged, and that only happens in the present moment. So it helps to lock into the present moment. And also a great advantage with having the eyes open here in shamatha practice is that it starts to break down the false sense of duality. If we meditate with eyes closed, then there's really a strong sense that there's a me in here and a world out there. There really has a strong sense there's a subject-object duality. With the eyes open, that strong sense of subject-object duality starts to break down. And that's going to be very helpful because later in Vipassana practice of emptiness, we're coming to realize, in fact, there's no subject-object duality. And so if we've already weakened that in shamatha, then that's going to help in Vipassana. But also the last reason to have the eyes open is that it helps us to transition to daily life. That also in daily life, we'd like to be able to observe our thoughts and emotions without getting caught up in them and without getting overwhelmed. But generally in daily life, we have our eyes open, which means that if we're here in this meditation practice, if we've only ever meditated with eyes closed, observing thoughts and emotions, we don't have the habit of observing them with eyes open, which means it's going to be difficult to bring that into daily life. But if we meditate with eyes open, observing thoughts and emotions, then it's much easier to do that in daily life. And so for these reasons, we have the eyes open. Again, either naturally or partially. Just resting your gaze in the space in front of us, not really looking at anything, but certainly not trying to deliberately unfocus the gaze. That's straining the eyes. Keeping the eyes relaxed, blink as often as you need. And here again, we can adjust the level of our focus. If we're getting agitated, distracted, you might like to lower your gaze a little bit. If you're getting very dull and drowsy, elevate the gaze. And then we're just watching thoughts, just recognize them, see them when they're arising. And really here, not following them, not trying to get rid of them. So have no preferences at all between good thoughts, bad thoughts, and no thoughts. They're all equally okay. Whatever's there, if it's nice thoughts, if it's unpleasant thoughts, there's no thoughts, all equally okay. And in some respect, sometimes it's even better. It may even be better to have thoughts than no thoughts, because if there's no thoughts, as we saw earlier in the text, there's very much a danger that we just fall into dullness and drowsiness because there's nothing really to observe except that empty space. Whereas if there's thoughts, we have to pay very close attention. But to have no preference, good thoughts, bad thoughts, no thoughts, all equally okay. And then what we introduced in last weekend is that as a beginner particularly, the strong tendency in this practice is to get caught up and swept away by our thoughts and emotions, because that's our habit. And so if you find that you're getting caught up in your thoughts and emotions a lot, then there's a short-term strategy that can help us to get into the practice. That is to anchor ourselves in the breath, particularly the rhythm of the breath, but any of the breath variation, mindfulness of breathing variations. If you're just getting constantly swept away, caught up and swept away, then go back into the body and focus on the breath. Rhythm of the breath, the abdomen, probably the nostrils is not a good idea. It's probably a bit agitating, but full body, rhythm or abdomen, and have that as your main focus point. And then just a little bit in the corner of the mind, notice any thoughts that are coming up. And that way we can anchor ourselves in the breath. And then over time, less emphasis on the breath, more emphasis on the thoughts, and then eventually we can let go of the breath altogether so that we can transition into this practice through the anchoring in the breath. So again, if you find that you're just getting caught up and swept away, I very much recommend anchor yourself in the breath. Have that as your main object and just notice a little bit in the corner of the mind, any thoughts arising. That's the practice we're going to do now. Finding a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. A vigilant posture is to simply keep the back nice and straight. And then at the same time, allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. And in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And then having established a good posture, to keep the body as still as possible, avoiding any unnecessary movement. And allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And then setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. And then allow your eyes to be at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you. Keeping the eyes soft and relaxed. Blink as often as you need. And then bring your attention to your own mind and observe your own mind and whatever is arising in the space of the mind. Simply observe any thoughts, emotions, memories, or mental images that are arising in the mind. Without following thoughts, without trying to get rid of thoughts. Whatever thoughts arise, simply recognize each one. If you find that you got caught up in any thoughts and got carried away, first thing to do is simply relax. Then release grasping onto that thought and very gently return to observing the mind. So relax, release, and return. Simply keep coming back to the mind again and again, each time you become distracted. And if you notice if there's any buildup of agitation or tension, lower the gaze. Or if you notice you're drifting into dullness and drowsiness, elevate your gaze. And if you're finding that you're just constantly getting caught up in your thoughts and getting swept away, then go back and anchor yourself in the body. That is, mainly focus on the sensations of the breath, either the rhythm, the full body, or the abdomen. Have that as your main object. And then just a little bit in the corner of your mind, notice any thoughts that are arising. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Got time for question answer now. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and Tomer will read them out. And so now that's the review of all of last weekend's material. So if you have any questions still from anything from last weekend, now's the time to ask it, because next session we're going to begin with the Vipassana section of the text.
Well, nothing in the chat yet. But I can, I have a question.
Sure.
If it's, we said, and it appears in the text, that the preliminaries precede the practice, the shamatha practice, and then after that we go to Vipassana and so on. So that sounds sort of equivalent to the 3 higher trainings of ethics, concentration, wisdom. So is preliminaries sort of equivalent to ethics in a way?
So we saw that in the common preliminaries, we have in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen traditions, they're packaged as the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. In the Lam Rim, they're packaged a little bit differently, but they're the same practices: precious human life and death and impermanence. So those 2 together is really helping us to have an aspiration to make our life meaningful right now. But then how do we make our life meaningful? So then to reflect on the causality of our actions. And that is the topic in the Buddhist text, is the topic on karma. To really appreciate the harmful actions lead to suffering, beneficial actions lead to happiness. And then from that reflection, that would lead us to adopt an ethical lifestyle. So that is the first of the 3 higher trainings, is ethics. But then to understand that even if we're being ethical, we're still stuck in suffering, in samsara. And so then the 4th reflection, this view of genuine, I call view of genuine happiness, often in the text is called something like reflecting on the unsatisfactory nature of samsara or something like that. But it's really to understand where is the source of suffering, where's the source of happiness, and then based on that, to develop the wish to be free, to be liberated, renunciation. And then once we've developed that, then how do we become liberated? Is through shamatha and vipassana, through single point of concentration, which is the basis for vipassana practice. And so there we have the 3 higher trainings that would be then more or less equivalent to what we're doing here at the sutra level of practice. The ethics coming within the preliminary practices, but of course also here in the Mahayana, we're cultivating bodhicitta. So the ethics involved in that is more than just avoiding harmful behavior. And so because of the bodhicitta motivation, which is also really a preliminary, it's the door of entry to the Mahayana, then inbuilt in that is the ethics, an expanded type of ethics, that not only avoiding harmful behavior, but engaging in virtue and the ethics of benefiting others as well. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, there is that parallel there. You're muted.
Thanks. And thanks for the answer. We have a question on the chat from Iftach. Question reads, can you please talk about the differences between observing thoughts and resting in awareness?
So observing thoughts is, we are interested in, and again here, the word thoughts is not just thinking, it's all mental activities. It's including emotions, mental images, memories, and so forth. Not included in thoughts is sounds, sensations, and so forth, no sense objects, just mental events. So in the first practice, we're observing mental events. So we, as the instruction was, we are to recognize them. So when they come, we watch them, we pay close attention to them, The trick is, of course, without getting caught up in them, without following them. So observing thoughts is just observing very clearly what is arising in the mind. Whereas resting in awareness is actually turning awareness in upon itself and just knowing that we're aware. So there, we're not paying attention to appearances. Observing thoughts, we are paying very close attention to appearances. Resting in awareness doesn't mean, though, we're blocking thoughts, we're trying to get rid of them. They can still be there. In fact, they will be there. But in resting in awareness, we're not interested in them. We're not paying attention to them. The only thing we're interested in is knowing that we're aware. So in the first one, we are paying attention to thoughts. In the resting in awareness, we're not paying attention to thoughts. In both of those practice, thoughts will be there. In one of them, we focus on them, and the other one, we just ignore them.
Great, thanks. Another question from Tom. Often when I meditate, I have the experience of music in my mind like an internal player. Although I recognize it is as a thought, it feels like it has a different mechanism than the other mental events, and that it seems that it is not depending on me feeding it. Is there an antidote or skillful method to address this issue?
Yes. What we don't want to do is go, oh, not that again, go away, go away. You do that, it'll be louder, it'll last longer. So the two things we don't want to do is feed it by getting caught up in it and trying to block it. So we need to have an attitude of, if it's there, it's okay, doesn't matter, let it be there. If we have the attitude, it's not okay, I don't want it to be there, we're just going to have aversion, we're going to get frustrated, we're going to get upset, and it'll definitely stay there. So have the attitude when this sort of songs come up in our mind that they're okay. And the thing is that often they are things that we're very familiar with and we often like. And so they'll stay there because we're sort of at some level, we're feeding it because we like it. We like that sound, we like that music. Or if we don't like it, we're trying to get rid of it. So either way, we're feeding it, either by subconsciously enjoying it or subconsciously or consciously not liking it and wanting it to go away. So it'll just stay there. So again, if that arises, then it's okay, doesn't matter, it can be there. And then just keep coming back. If you get caught up in it, just keep coming back to the object. Keep coming back to the object, whatever you're focusing on. And if you're focusing on the mind, then that will be a mental event, it's a mental event. So then if we're getting caught up in that mental event, then again, we can use those two short-term strategies. We can either give it a name like music or something. Don't label the contents, otherwise they'll get caught up. Just go, oh, music, okay. Or if it's really still pulling us, then go back in the body and really focus mainly on the breath. And then just a little bit, notice it in the corner of the mind. But again, the first line strategy, what we don't want to do when it comes up is either just allow ourselves to get caught up in it because it's really nice, or go, oh, not that, go away, go away, go away, because that both of those, that it'll stay. So just be okay with it being there and just keep coming back to the object. That's all. I think we've got time for at least one or two more questions if there are any.
Nothing in the chat yet.
Mm-hmm. We'll just wait another minute or so. If there's no questions, then we'll take a break early. We've only got 3 minutes left anyway. Okay, doesn't seem like there's any questions. So let's just break there. In the next session, we'll begin the Vipassana part of the Sutra Mahamudra. And we'll go into first a general presentation about how to introduce nature of mind, some examples that you will find in like the oral Kagyu Mahamudra tradition. And then following that, the main presentation is a presentation on emptiness. So that's to come, but let's take a break now for 30 minutes and come back at 10:15 for the second session.